Do you find yourself curious about adding classical records to your collection, but don't really know where to start? Well, this video is for you. Vinyl community, Poetry on Plastic here, and today I've decided to grab 25 records that I think someone who's into vinyl can start a classical record collection with. Now, in selecting these records, I had a number of problems. One of which is I wanted to select stuff that's very easy to find. I was originally going to select in-print records, but I found that narrowed my choices a little bit too much. It would have been pretty much all Analogue productions and Speaker's Corner reissues, and I wanted to have a little bit more variety than that. So instead, I just kind of narrowed things down to records that are either in print or very, very easy to find, not horribly expensive to find. So I didn't put any, early UK Decca wide bands on here. I didn't put any like silver label SAX Columbia recordings on here. Nothing crazy like that. The few records that are vintage on here are ones that you should be able to find pretty easily. And putting together a list of just 25, it was originally going to be 20, but I simply couldn't decide and had to make it 25. There's still noticeable omissions on here. I didn't end up including any Mozart, even though there's a couple Mozart recordings I wanted to include. There's very little opera on here, only one opera recording. Things kind of are centered on the Romantic era, because I think for a lot of people that's the most approachable repertoire of orchestral music, especially that's available on vinyl, because they recorded a lot of these war horses in the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. So it's a contentious list even for me. So this is not meant to be a definitive must-own set of recordings. I think this is just some recordings that I picked out that I think are safe recordings for anyone looking to dip their toes into classical music. It's recordings I think a lot of people will enjoy. They're recordings I think that generally have very good sound quality, that will sound good on most systems, and in general, recordings and pieces and performances that I think will get people interested in classical music and listening to more classical music. So that was kind of the impetus behind my picks. I'm sure I left out important stuff, but that's the nature of any list. So without further ado, here are 25 recordings I picked on vinyl to start your classical collection with. The first one I'm going to show is one that I talk about almost to death on this channel. And anyone who messages me, because a lot of people message me, I don't own any classical music on vinyl, what should I get? What should be my first record? I generally recommend this one. This is the Analogue Productions reissue of the famous Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony recording of Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. This is one of the most perfect recordings I think ever committed to tape. The performance by the Chicago Symphony is beautiful. Reiner's interpretation is great. The sound quality is incredible. I have here the Analogue Productions Double 45 reissue. You can get the 33 of this too if you don't want to spend $50 on a record. And the original of this is also something you can find. However, I think the reissues are very good. They're in print, so this is definitely an easy recommendation to anyone looking to add a classical record to their collection. The next one is one that's kind of a core Warhorse classical recording, I think. However, it is a little harder to find because it's not in print right now, and that is Leonard Bernstein in the New York Philharmonic playing Shostakovich Symphony No. 5. This is kind of a landmark recording. It's astoundingly good. The New York Philharmonic, in the time that this was recorded, just before the New York Philharmonic had embarked on a tour of the Soviet Union, playing Shostakovich Symphony No. 5, and as you can see here on this photo, they even met Shostakovich and performed the work for him, and Shostakovich was actually very impressed by the playing of this orchestra and their interpretation of his music. So this was recorded at the return of that tour, so the orchestra was very was very much well rehearsed in this music, and they laid down a bristling performance here on this Columbia recording. Now, Columbia is not the best sound quality in the world, just in general, but I do think this is a pretty good sounding recording by Columbia standards. I have here the Cisco Music reissue that was done, wow, I want to say like 20 years ago now. You can still find it. It might be on a little on the pricey side. If you don't want to hunt down the Cisco, or if you can't find it, you can also get the original 6i Columbia. It should not be too expensive. Even though this is a Cisco, this is what the original Columbia center label looks like of the 6i pressing. And if you can't find that either, I mean, the worst case scenario is the later 2i pressing, which is not the best, but it's okay. It will serve you all right. This is a High Q Supercuts reissue of a very well-known EMI recording. This is the Philadelphia Orchestra conducted by the young Riccardo Muti, playing the Firebird Suite and Mussorgsy's Pictures at an Exhibition. So this was originally on EMI, and you can get an original EMI copy of this fairly affordably. This is the High Q reissue that was done from the original master tape. The High Q reissues are kind of a mixed bag because the sound quality, the mastering quality on them is very good. However, the pressing quality I have found to be kind of I do get some noisy records from them. So just know that going in. So if you can get a deal on this, do it. But if you're looking at if they're going for expensive amounts at some point, the original EMI is a good choice, and I don't think any one sounds better than the other, in my opinion. I do include some Dvorak on here because I feel like Dvorak is like the rock and roll of Romantic era classical music. And if you're gonna pick Dvorak, I figured might as well go with the hit. And that's Dvorak Symphony No. 9, Symphony from the New World. And I picked the Istvan Kertész recording with the Vienna Phil on Decca. This is a Speaker's Corner reissue. It's still in print to the best of my knowledge. You can pick it up for $30. The sound quality is incredible. Nice early Decca recording. If you can't find the Speaker's Corner, you can also get yourself an original like a London Blueback. Shouldn't be too expensive. But this is just a wonderful, vintage late 50s, early 60s recording. Up next, this is a box set, and actually one I was just listening to yesterday, of the 5 piano concertos of Sergei Prokofiev. This is Vladimir Ashkenazy with the London Symphony conducted by Andrei Previn. This is a wonderful sounding 70s era Decca box set of the 5 Prokofiev piano concertos. Very affordable to find. The sound quality on this narrow band 70s Decca is very good. So I think this is a steal. And Prokofiev is one of those composers that I just, in my opinion, just didn't write bad music. There's fantastic, great Prokofiev works, and then there's really good Prokofiev works, and I think that's it. I don't really ever hear bad Prokofiev compositions, but his piano concertos are some of his best works, so I highly recommend this box set. Is a very affordable way to kind of get them all. Another Leonard Bernstein recording that I pulled is his wonderful recording on Columbia of Shostakovich's Second Piano Concerto and the Ravel G Major Piano Concerto. The interesting thing about this recording is these both feature Leonard Bernstein himself playing the piano concerto while conducting from the piano. I think this is one of the better performances out there of the Ravel G Major Piano Concerto, which is one of my favorite pieces. The second movement is just stupid beautiful. This is a Sony Impex all-analog reissue that I believe is still in print. If you cannot find that, again, original 6i Columbia pressing is probably your best bet, but the Impex sounds phenomenal. In my opinion, Fritz Reiner has a really great recorded legacy with the Chicago Symphony of a lot of the standard Warhorse orchestral material. And while the Scheherazade may be my first recommendation of the Reiner years of Chicago, I think one of his best recordings is this album here, the Reiner Sound. This is an Analogue Productions 33 RPM reissue that's still in print, and this has just wonderful repertoire on it. 2 works from Ravel, Rhapsody Espagnole and Pavane for a Dead Princess. And then you get some Rachmaninoff on here, Isle of the Dead, which is, I think, one of my favorite Rachmaninoff pieces. So absolutely brilliant repertoire on this, and very, very brilliant playing from the Chicago Symphony under Reiner, recorded in wonderful living stereo sound. Up next is another Previn recording. This may be my favorite piece in the entire orchestral repertoire. This is Andrei Previn in the London Symphony doing Rachmaninoff Symphony No. 2. This is not one that's in print that you can get on a reissue, unfortunately. However, the original British EMI postage stamp recording, and I'll show you what that looks like on the label, is affordable and relatively easy to find. There we go, British EMI postage stamp pressing. Now, this next one may be specifically for record collectors with a stereo with maybe some bigger speakers, some speakers that go down a little lower than maybe your average bookshelf speaker, because this is Saint-Saens Symphony No. 3, the organ symphony, performed by Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony Orchestra on living stereo. If you don't know what the organ symphony is, it's one of Saint-Saens' best compositions, French, late Romantic French composer. And man, the organ part towards the end of the symphony, it will shake your room. It's very, very, a very big sound, a very grand sound, and it's just very, very fun music. This 33 RPM Analog Productions reissue is still in print, very easy to get, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for any Saint-Saens, and it just in general like French music from the end of the 19th century. I already included one Stravinsky work on this list, but I think I feel compelled to include another. This is perhaps his most famous work, or infamous, however you want to look at it. This is the Rite of Spring. In French, it's Le Sacre du Printemps. I'm trying with the French, guys. Just bear with me. Conducted by Georg Solti in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra on Decca. This is a Speaker's Corner reissue of this wonderful 70s Decca recording with Chicago Symphony. You know, this is possibly Stravinsky's most brash, most violent work, especially of his early period, and it suits the Chicago Symphony Orchestra very well, I think. It definitely plays to their strengths. The brass on this recording sound incredible. So again, this is the Speaker's Corner reissue. I think it's still in print. If it's not still in print, you should be able to get it fairly easily on the secondhand market, even sealed. But also the original UK pressed London, or even if you're in Europe, the Decca pressing, is still very affordable and easy to find. So, you know, whichever way you choose, this is an excellent recording to have in your collection. I don't think any classical collection can do without Wagner. Now, I do not recommend jumping headfirst into Wagner with a full LP set of one of his operas, or even watching one of his operas. They're like usually 4 and 5 hours long. So I recommend just listening to some suites from his repertoire first. And I think one of the better ones that's very easy to get now is this wonderful RCA living stereo recording of the famous conductor Leopold Stokowski. You may know Stokowski from the Fantasia soundtrack, conducting the Symphony of the Air here on RCA living stereo. This has some wonderful excerpts from Wagner operas on here. It has the Ride of the Valkyries from Die Valkyrie, with singers, the Prelude to Act 3 from Tristan and Isolde, which has, I think, the best English horn solo in opera repertoire ever, and then Das Rheingold, Entrance of the Gods into Valhalla, and the some selections of music from Tannhäuser, which, you know, the Pilgrim's Chorus and the Venus music, all some of the best material from Wagner operas out there. Wonderfully conducted by Stokowski. This RCA recording sounds wonderful. This I have here is the original Shaded Dog. However, right now, Analog Productions has released their reissue of this record that also sounds fantastic. It's probably much easier and cheaper to get the reissue, but this is highly recommended. If you've never listened to any Wagner, this is a good way to start. This is the second and only box set I'm showing in this video. So about 2 or 3 years ago, Deutsche Grammophon did some very special all analog reissues of some of the best repertoire in their catalog, mastered and cut by Emil Berliner in Germany. And one of the releases that they did is this wonderful box set of Mavrinsky and the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra playing Tchaikovsky's symphonies number 4, 5, and 6. These are some of the best Tchaikovsky recordings that you will ever hear. And the remastering job on these is pretty definitive. This is definitely the best sounding version of these performances you can get. This box may not be easily available anymore. I would definitely check around and see. There are earlier, 70s Deutsche Grammophon boxes of this set you can get. The sound quality will not be the same. But this is such a good mastering and performance and pressing that I just had to include it on this list. So if you can find this, go for it. It's some of the best Tchaikovsky you're ever going to hear. I didn't pick a ton of concerto recordings, but there is one concerto recording I cannot leave off, and this is Edward Elgar's Cello Concerto, brilliantly performed by the young Jacqueline Dupre, who was one of the best cellists in the world in the mid-20th century. Very tragic story. I recommend doing a little bit of reading up on her. Anyway, this is conducted by Sir John Barbiroli and the London Symphony Orchestra. Legendary recording. Absolutely legendary recording. This is the EMI Testament reissue. EMI have a couple of all analog reissues done on their in-house label called Testament. This is one of them. The sound quality is pretty good. It's been a long time. I don't know if I ever have actually listened to an original postage stamp EMI pressing. Those can get kind of expensive, and to the best of my knowledge, this is still in print and around $30, so I would recommend going with this one, especially if you've never heard this recording before. But it's such a brilliant performance. It really is. There is not a lot of Baroque music on this list, and there's a reason for that. So, by and large, the way we play and perform Baroque music nowadays is very different from the way people were playing and performing it in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when, vinyl was in its heyday. For the most part, 50 years ago, people were playing Baroque music like Vivaldi, Telemann, Handel, Bach, much in the same way that they were performing Romantic music. Since that time, there has been a lot of scholarship on how people actually played Baroque music in Baroque times. And that's improved the performance practice and improved, I think, the way we play Baroque music. So it's hard for me to actually recommend a lot of Baroque recordings from the 50s, 60s, and 70s when records were made. But luckily, there's a wonderful recent recording of Vivaldi's Four Seasons that I wanted to highlight here. This is a recording by the chamber group, the Italian chamber group Interpreti Veneziani. This is recorded by a small audiophile label active right now called Chasing the Dragon Records. And this recording of the Four Seasons was cut direct to disc by Chasing the Dragon. And the performance is incredibly good. It's full of life and energy, and it's exactly what I'm looking for in a performance of Vivaldi. So if you want to explore Baroque music on vinyl, I think start with this. It's still in print. You can still get it, Acoustic Sounds, Music Direct, websites like that, because the sound quality is extraordinary, very lifelike, and the performance is just very vigorous, and I think exactly the way Vivaldi should be played. I do feel bad for only putting one opera recording on this list, because here's the thing. I think the best way to experience opera is by viewing a staged production. I'm not one of those people that can sit down and put on a 3 LP box set of an opera and just listen to it. To me, there's not enough visual stimulation to get me through 2 or 3 hours. There's just not. So I actually, if I'm buying opera on record, I like to get highlights albums. The problem is there's none of those are being made right now. There's no audiophile reissues of opera highlights albums, or of opera in general. But fortunately, the opera highlights records from the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s are very, very easy to get, very cheap to come by, and you can get some wonderful recordings. So I thought, okay, I need to include an opera recording on here. Probably, I think the best bet is going with something Puccini. If I pick one opera recording and it's not Puccini, there's probably something wrong. So my opera highlights / Puccini pick is highlights from his final opera, Turandot. This is conducted by Eric Leinsdorf and stars Birgit Nielsen as Turandot. This one is a wonderful sounding recording on vintage RCA Living Stereo. This is a Shaded Dog pressing here. This one may be a little difficult to find. Not expensive, but you know, this is not one of those ones you can just go online and buy immediately. You may have to wait around, look on eBay or Discogs for a bit. But you won't pay a lot for this recording, and the sound is wonderful. The performance is one of the best out there on record. And yeah, I think there's no better introduction to, you know, the grandioseness of romantic opera than this Puccini opera here. I mean, Nessun Dorma, In Questa Regia, it is just brilliant repertoire. One of my favorite symphonies is Prokofiev's Symphony No. 5, and there's so many good recordings of it out there. You know, for a while I was going to grab the Mercury Living Presence Dorati recording, but I think ultimately the safest bet for introduction to this symphony is the EMI Andrei Previn recording with the London Symphony Orchestra. Brilliantly recorded, somewhat easy to get. You can find this at an affordable price. You might have to import it. This is again that postage stamp label. But the performance here by Andrei Previn and the London Symphony Orchestra of this Prokofiev work is just riveting. I picked 2 Beethoven recordings to go on this list. One is one I showed in my last Beethoven video, the Bruno Walter Beethoven Symphony No. 5. Walter, of course, I think was just one of the master conductors of the 20th century. This is a Speaker's Corner Columbia reissue. You can also find an original of this, but the Speaker's Corner is currently in print and I think sounds much better than the original. Another one that I showed in my Beethoven video, this is also a Speaker's Corner reissue. This one is a vintage Decca recording with Hans Knappertsbusch and the Vienna Phil, Clifford Curzon playing Beethoven Piano Concerto No. 5, the Emperor Concerto. Every collection definitely needs some music by the French composer Claude Debussy, and I think probably the best piece to introduce his work is his wonderful composition La Mer, which stands for the sea. So I picked a RCA living stereo recording of Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony performing La Sea, as well as Iber's Port of Call. But this recording of La Mer is one of the best out there, and we're lucky that currently it's in print by Analogue Productions. So yeah, this is a very easy one to recommend. The sound quality is gorgeous, the performance is gorgeous. Munch is very good at French Impressionist repertoire like Debussy and Ravel, etc. So yeah, this is an easy recommendation. Everyone should have a copy of Debussy's La Mer. I think it's just an essential piece of the orchestral repertoire. One of the more fun romantic symphonies out there is Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. It's truly one of those symphonies that specifically tells a story, and I'll let you read up on what that story is on your own time. However, I picked a very famous old Decca recording of Atalfo Argenta in the Paris Conservatory Orchestra performing the Symphonie Fantastique. This is a very early Decca stereo. The original of this goes for big money, so don't try to buy an original. This is the Speaker's Corner reissue. It's still in print, it's wonderfully done, so get this instead, $30 versus whatever, something crazy the original Decca is going for. In recommending recordings for this list, I wanted to introduce some slightly more modernist orchestral recordings, but I don't want to pick anything too crazy because I think definitely that's a type of music that people need to get adjusted to. But I think one 20th century composer that's very approachable, even though he was definitely composing in a more modern idiom, was the music of Bela Bartok. And I think one of Bartok's best compositions, a late era composition for him, is his wonderful Concerto for Orchestra. This is, once again, an Analogue Productions RCA Living Stereo reissue, Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Fritz Reiner. Fritz Reiner was a longtime friend of Bela Bartok's, and some historians say that Reiner was the one that originally convinced Bartok to write this work. So it's very fitting, I think, that Fritz Reiner was the one to perform and record it on what is one of the definitive recordings of this piece. Just excellent playing, excellent sound, a must-have, I think. Picking a Bach recording for this set, because this, any small classical collection needs a Bach record, a Bach recording. Again, this was hard though because of what I said before about performances of Baroque music. But I think one performer who has easily transcended any opinions about performance practice is that of Glenn Gould, the famous 20th century pianist. And his recordings of the Goldberg variations, he did 2, are both absolutely outstanding, and I don't think anyone can have any real criticism of them. He did them on piano, not on harpsichord, as probably would have been done at the time. But they're just so good. And of the 2, I like his earlier 1955 one, and so I picked here the 1955 mono recording of the Goldberg variations on Columbia. This is a recording that Sony, which owns the Columbia catalog, recently put out, done from the original analog tapes. They did this for both of his recordings, this one and the 80s one. They're both available in an actual analog pressing, and these are still in print. You can still get them. I think the better of the 2, in my opinion, is this 1955 recording. It's absolutely just brilliant musicianship. Glenn Gould was a master of interpreting Bach, I think. I think The Planets is definitely a very easily recognizable piece for even people that aren't familiar with classical music, so I had to include The Planets on here. It's a wonderful piece that is definitely worth exploring, aside from the couple 30-second clips that you see in commercials of it. And this is a wonderful, well-regarded recording of Zubin Mehta and the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra playing Holst's The Planets Suite. This is a Speaker's Corner reissue, but this recording is available in many ways. There's the Speaker's Corner reissue, there's the ORG 445 reissue, which I think is actually out of print and hard to find now. This is still in print. You can also get this on the original London or Decca pretty affordably, I think. So, but this one's in print and easy to find, and it sounds great, so easy to recommend this recording of The Planets. I wanted to put some Brahms on this list, and I was really torn. Do I pick a symphony, or do I pick the, one of his concertos, the piano concerto, violin concerto? I ultimately decided on the violin concerto because it also has something that I think should be in every collection, and that's a recording by the famous violinist Joshua Heifetz. My God, Heifetz was one of the most brilliant violinists who ever lived, at least that we have record of. His recorded legacy is pretty much flawless, and one of his best recordings, I think, is this recording of the Brahms Violin Concerto, once again with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Fritz Reiner conducting. This is, of course, the Analog Productions reissue. I know I've recommended a lot of Chicago Symphony recordings with Reiner on AP. The reason is there's not that much classical music that's in print and easy to get right now. And these AP reissues are just a godsend. They really are the best thing to happen to classical vinyl collecting in a long time. Because most of these recordings are up there in like top 5 for each of these pieces. So it's just really easy to recommend them when they're so easy to get, $35 and brilliant mastering by Ryan Smith. I recommend a lot of these, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So I had to put a Mahler on the list, and we're ending with Mahler. And, a lot of people say, Mahler 1 is the most approachable Mahler symphony. And I think it is, but it's not the most riveting, I don't think. And I didn't want to include something that was overly kind of, that was a lot like the Symphony No. 2 or Symphony No. 8 that has a lot of voices and choral stuff in it. So I was torn as to what one to pick. But honestly, I think one of the best examples that you can show someone of Mahler to get them into Mahler is Symphony No. 9. And I picked here a Deutsche Grammophon recording of Carl Maria Giulini conducting the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in Mahler's Symphony No. 9. One of the best recordings of this piece that's out there. This is actually a Speaker's Corner reissue. I don't know if you can still get this. However, the original Deutsche Grammophon box set is very affordable as well. I have a copy of the original Deutsche Grammophon. I got it at a half-price books for like $9. So if you can't find the Speaker's Corner, which is probably the best sounding version, get the original box set. It's such a brilliant performance. It's the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at their best. Giulini, very underrated conductor. And I mean, if you're not in tears in the fourth movement Adagio, something's wrong with you. So VC, that was it. That was 25 vinyl recordings to jumpstart your classical music collection. It was hard to pick 25, it really was. And I'm sure there's some really important stuff that is essential that I left out. So Let me know in the comments, what takes do you agree with? What picks do you disagree with? What would you have included instead? Let me know what some of your essential classical recordings on vinyl are. For those that actually take my advice, I know there's people on this channel that really listen to my recommendations. Let me know what you pick up and what you think of the recordings that I selected. Did I do well? Let me know down in the comments. And I think that does it for this video. Cheers, VC.